This happened during spring break of my junior year of college. Me and my 3 closest friends, Kevin, Ali, and Seb, decided to go car camping in Colorado. We'd been doing these trips together since freshman year, but we were all pretty broke that semester, so we went with dispersed camping instead of paying for an actual campground. I found this spot on one of those camping apps that showed free sites. It was somewhere outside of Buena Vista, tucked back on this forest service road that seemed to go on forever. The 4 of us had done enough camping together that we knew what we were doing. We got there around late afternoon and found this clearing near what looked like it used to be a creek bed. It was completely dried up, but you could tell water had run through there at some point. The area was pretty isolated. We didn't see any other campers or even tire tracks from recent visitors. It was honestly perfect for the kind of vibe we were going for. We set up our tents in a loose cluster, maybe 15 feet apart from each other. Nothing fancy about the arrangement, just wherever the ground looked level and didn't have too many rocks. I don't even remember what we did that night. Probably just drank a few of the beers we brought while playing cards. We were all pretty tired from the drive, so we called it around 11 and went to our separate tents. I remember sleeping really heavily that night, which was weird for me to begin with, but especially during a camping trip. Usually, and this is when I'm sleeping on a comfortable bed in a climate-controlled room, I wake up multiple times from being cold or needing to pee or whatever else. Point is, I'm a very light sleeper, and during a camping trip, forget it. I'm used to waking up at least 3 times, but that night I felt completely knocked out, like I'd taken a sleeping pill or something. When I woke up the next morning, something felt off immediately. I unzipped my tent to get some fresh air, and then I just froze. I noticed it immediately. All 4 of our tents had been moved, like not ruffled or roughed up by an animal, actually moved. They were arranged in this perfect square formation around a pile of stones that definitely hadn't been there when we went to sleep. Part of me felt like I was still dreaming. That's how bizarre and borderline unbelievable the sight before me was. Each tent had been relocated maybe 20 or 30 feet from where we'd originally set them up, but that's not really what freaked me out. The stakes were still perfectly secured in the ground, and nothing inside any of the tents had been disturbed. My sleeping bag was exactly how I left it. My phone was still plugged into my portable charger, and all my other gear was in the same spot. Nothing was missing from my tent, which I checked, double-checked, and triple-checked. I thought I was going crazy. I yelled to wake up my friends. Kevin was the first one to emerge from his tent, and I didn't even have to explain the situation to him. I could see on his face that he was experiencing the same confusion I was. Ali and Seb crawled out a few seconds later, and as I watched them take a look around at the campsite, it was the exact same thing. None of us remembered anything. But then Ali mentioned that she'd had this really vivid dream about walking in a line through some kind of desert landscape while someone counted her steps out loud. And then Kevin chimed in, saying he had a dream about being in the army, marching alongside his fellow soldiers. Seb didn't remember having a dream, and neither did I. But we found it odd that both Ali and Kevin had eerily similar dreams. The vibe between the 4 of us was really weird, but hard to describe. It was almost like we were reading each other's minds. It's kind of hard to express the feeling, but it really did feel like we were more connected than we had been the night before, but in a bad way. I remember looking back and forth between them, trying to figure out what it was that I was feeling around me. The best way I can think to describe the feeling is what it would have felt like if there was a 5th person watching all of us, who was also part of all of us. We examined the campsite a little more carefully, looking for clues or anything that would help us piece together what happened. At first, Kevin suggested that maybe we had just gotten really drunk and forgot about what we did the night before, but this theory was shattered in about 5 seconds. We found these drag marks in the dirt leading from where each tent had originally been positioned to where they ended up. The weird thing was, the drag marks stopped about 10 feet short of each tent's final location, like someone had dragged them part way and then lifted and carried them the rest of the distance. The pile of stones in the center was even stranger. There were exactly 4 stones, and they were balanced on top of each other like some kind of sculpture. It actually would have been pretty were it not for the circumstances. Kevin walked over to get a closer look, and as he was leaning in to examine the top stone, he tripped and ended up knocking the whole thing over. The stones just kind of tumbled to the ground, nothing dramatic. For a second, the four of us just stood there in silence, staring at the scattered stones. And then things went from a 5 to a 10. At the exact same time, all four of us started hearing this low rumbling sound coming from somewhere in the distance. It sounded like rocks grinding against each other. Not like an earthquake or anything, more like an old stone door being pushed open. Hearing that sound kind of sent us into a panic, and we all just started packing without even discussing things. Like I said before, it felt like we were reading each other's minds, and that also applied to our feelings. I could feel my friend's fear, and I knew they could feel mine. It was really freaky, 10 times freakier than it had been not 2 minutes ago. I don't think I've ever packed up a campsite so quickly in my life. Realistically, we were out of there in under 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity in that moment. I'm not going to harp too much on what happened. I really don't like thinking about what happened that night, and I'm worried that if I think too much about it, it'll go from being a fever dream that sort of sits in the back of my mind to something more real. That was 5 years ago now. The four of us don't really see each other anymore, but I guess that's kind of how it goes as everyone gets older. Kevin moved to Denver after graduation. Allie's in grad school in California, and I think Seb moved to Chicago with his girlfriend. We keep in touch, but we've never really talked about that night since. My name is Simon. This happened last summer when I was 23. My girlfriend Cadence and I had been planning this camping trip for months. Just the two of us, no cell service, no distractions. We'd been together for about 1.5 years at that point, and honestly, things had been getting a little stale. Not bad, just routine. We figured a weekend in the woods would be good for us. We picked a spot in the Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina. I'd been looking at different locations online for weeks, trying to find something that wasn't too crowded but also wasn't completely isolated. The place I settled on was this campground about 3 miles down a Forest Service road. According to the reviews, it had maybe 6 or 7 sites total, and they were pretty spread out from each other. We left Friday afternoon around 3, stopped for supplies at a grocery store near the forest entrance, and made it to the campground just before sunset. The road getting there was rough, lots of potholes and loose gravel, but my truck handled it fine. When we pulled into the main clearing, I was honestly pretty satisfied with my choice. There were a few picnic tables scattered around, a couple fire rings, and the sites themselves were tucked back into the trees enough that you'd have some privacy. We drove around slowly, checking out the different spots. Most of them were empty, which was good. We passed one site that had a blue sedan parked there, but I couldn't see anyone around it. Cadence pointed to a spot at the far end of the campground, right where the road dead-ended into the forest. It had a decent clearing for the tent and was positioned so that the trees blocked the view of the other campsites. We spent the next hour setting everything up. Cadence is one of those people who's really particular about how things are arranged, so I mostly just followed her instructions. By the time we were done, it was starting to get dark. I got a fire going while Cadence made sandwiches, and for a while, everything felt exactly how it was supposed to. We were sitting there drinking beer, watching the flames, not really talking about anything important, just existing together, which I think was kind of the point. Around 10 or so, Cadence went to brush her teeth at the spigot near the picnic tables. I stayed by the fire, poking at it with a stick and finishing my beer. That's when I noticed someone standing at the edge of our site, just beyond where the light of the fire reached. I jumped a little, I'm not gonna lie, because I genuinely hadn't heard anyone walk up. The guy apologized for startling me, and said he was camped over in the blue sedan and that he just wanted to introduce himself. His name was Aiden, and he looked to be about 30. He had this really intense way of maintaining eye contact that made me a little uncomfortable, but I obviously wasn't going to say anything. Cadence walked back toward us, and I could tell from the way her hips were swaying that she was not pleased with the interruption. Aiden noticed her, turned, and said she picked a good spot, real secluded. He mentioned he was solo camping, trying to get away from people for the weekend, which seemed kind of contradictory since he was literally standing at our campsite making conversation. And by the way, as soon as Cadence walked back, I didn't exist anymore. This guy Aiden's full attention was on my girlfriend, which wasn't exactly surprising, but weird as hell. We talked for another minute or two, and by we, I mean he talked at Cadence while she just gave him awkward reply after awkward reply, waiting for him to get the hint. Eventually, I butted in and told him we wanted to get some sleep because we were waking up early. and that got him to leave. As soon as we walked into the darkness, I noticed he didn't use a flashlight or anything, which I thought was a little odd. Cadence and I agreed about the weirdness of the whole thing and decided to try and forget about it. We stayed up for another hour or so, then put out the fire and went to bed. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up. And the moment I woke up, I realized something was wrong. It took me all of 3 seconds to realize I had woken up to voices somewhere in the distance. It sounded like 2 people having a conversation somewhere near our campsite. I looked over and saw Cadence fast asleep, and that's when the guardian instinct in me kicked in. I didn't freeze or cower in the tent, but rather actually went out to investigate. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and poked my head out. The voices stopped almost immediately, like they had heard me even though I thought I was being dead silent. As quickly as I could, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it around our campsite. But whoever had been there had either already left or was further away than I initially thought. Eventually, I went back inside the tent and tried to go back to sleep. It was a public campsite after all. People stay up really late on camping trips, so I didn't think it was anything threatening. I just hoped whoever had been out there got the hint to have their 3 a.m. talk somewhere far away from where I was trying to sleep. I didn't bother mentioning it to Cadence the next morning. I didn't really see the point in stressing her out over nothing. We spent most of the day hiking, which was a lot of fun and a decent workout, honestly. As the sun started to go down, I went to grab more firewood from a pile we'd made near the truck. That's when I noticed something on the windshield. It was a napkin, folded in half and tucked under the wiper blade. I pulled it out and unfolded it, and I was shocked to discover that it was a note. A note saying, "You should move your tent." I obviously wasn't going to keep that to myself, so I showed Cadence the note and told her what happened the night before. When she saw the note, she immediately asked if it was Aiden. I said, I guess so, because who else would it be? And as the 2 of us were discussing what to do next, obviously more than a little freaked out, as if on cue, who walks up but Aiden? He was wearing the exact same getup as the day before, and looking at him filled me with a mix of rage and fear. The rage won, and I told him he needed to stop just walking up like that, more aggressively than I probably should have. I was 100% convinced he was behind the note and the talking for the night before, and I wasn't going to let him think that he was fooling me. He said sorry in a gruff voice and said he was just checking up on us. Before I could respond, Cadence asked him why he'd need to check up on us, and actually said something that really surprised me. He told us he didn't want to freak us out, but that he was surprised to see people as young as we were at the campsite. He said that there was a bunch of weird stuff that had been known to occur around here, freaky stuff. He said he'd found deserted campsites deep in the woods, signs of people, belongings, and other weird things. I didn't really trust a word he was saying, but he said it so matter-of-factly that part of me thought he was being genuine. He went on to say that he heard people walking around his car the night before, so he was going to cut his trip short and go home before the sun set. Then he advised us to do the same. At that point, I wasn't going to argue, and it's not like Cadence wanted to stick around either, so we all started packing our stuff. It was pretty stressful, being as the sun was already almost set to begin with. I could tell Cadence was starting to freak out because her hands were shaking as she was putting stuff in the car, and I tried my best to calm her down, but I wasn't feeling great about things either. We finally finished getting everything in the car, and I started pulling out without another word. The sun was basically set at that point, and it would probably be fully dark in a few minutes. But as I was driving out, I noticed Aiden's blue sedan was still in his campsite, which I found strange. I saw Aiden crouched down near one of his tires, so I actually stopped my car. I asked him what he was doing, and he stepped back from his car to reveal a massive gash in the tire, something that was definitely done deliberately. There was no question about it. Cadence said holy f***, and I was pretty shocked to see it as well. I didn't know what to do. At first, he asked if I could give him a lift, but Cadence whispered that she wouldn't be comfortable with that, so I told him I couldn't, which led him to ask me if I would call the police for him as soon as I got service, and I told him I would. I pulled out of the campground and started down the dirt road. My headlights were on full blast. We were maybe 100 yards down the road when I glanced to my right and saw them. There were 3 figures standing in the woods, maybe 30 feet off the road. They weren't moving, and it didn't look like they were trying to hide either, almost like they wanted to be seen. I only saw them for a split second, but I was 100% sure they were people, and Cadence noticed them as well. My foot instinctively hit the brake. I don't even know why. Maybe some part of me thought I should go back and warn Aiden, or maybe I was just trying to process what I was seeing. But before I could think it through, Cadence grabbed my arm and screamed at me to drive, like a genuine scream. So I did. Cadence didn't say anything the entire way back to the main highway. As soon as I got service, I pulled over and called 911. I told them everything, and the dispatcher said they'd send someone to check on him. We never heard back from them. I wasn't really expecting to, but I had this sick feeling that something really wrong happened to Aiden, and that I was partly to blame. Cadence tried to reassure me that he was in on the whole thing, which is a possibility, but I think that's just a way to cope more than anything. Either way, this is still something I think about from time to time.